What's happening, everybody? Well, the latest Dodge teaser video is out and it's entitled Scream. And it's basically a short video of the roided up leprechaun yelling at what looks like a breathalyzer machine with some mathematical formulas written across it. Now, basically it reads like this. The math on the thing is 105, so 105 at, and then in parentheses, 3.02 multiplied by 2.98, and that equals this number. It's 1582. Now, when I first started looking at this, I tried to math the thing out, and when I did, well, let's just say this is going to be a comedy of confirmation bias on my part. So just roll with me a little bit here. The first thing that I did was screw up the math. I actually screwed up how I typed the formula into my calculator, and it actually came up with something rather interesting. It was a number that looked eerily similar to a very common conversion factor for CFM to horsepower. And in my mistake, I came up with a number that was around 1.64 or 1.67 right there in that area. And if you basically divide 1582 by that 1.6, let's call it 67, you get basically how much horsepower we're messing with. That 1.67 conversion number is roughly how many CFM of air it would take to make a horsepower. In very high performance naturally aspirated engines, you would multiply the CFM by 1.3, sometimes even as little as 1.25. With a positive displacement supercharger, you have to multiply that number, or multiply a larger number. In this case, 1.65, 1.67 can be acceptable because you have a higher parasitic loss. So, a little bit less efficient to make the same type of power. And if you take 1582, if I remember that number to be correct, divide it by 1.67, you got 945 horsepower. And I thought, man, that's about right, about 100 horsepower more than a Demon. But then I started checking my work and I found out that little, again, talking about confirmation bias, the mistake that I made, even though it made perfectly good sense, it was just a coincidence. And I found that I had screwed the math up. So go back to the math, right? So 3.02 times 2.98 gives you a number of 8.9996. Well, if you remember, the first part of that math equation that they had was 105. So if you take 105 and you take, if you take 8.9996 divided by 105, you get a number that is 0.0857. Again, I'll say it again like a drinking game, confirmation bias. If you're into tuning Mopars, for example, you don't tune air-fuel ratio, you tune fuel-air ratio. And as coincidence would have it, 0.0857 is an absurdly familiar number to anybody that tunes Mopars because that is the fuel-air number that you put in your power and rich table if you want 11.67 to 1 fuel-air ratio. Or in this case, air-fuel ratio is what you would translate that to. Kind of normal parlance of fueling an engine, right? So when I saw that, I went, oh, I got it. So the funny thing is even if you're running on E85, if you don't calibrate your meter to E85 and you still have it to gasoline, it's going to show 11.67 in essence. And so I'm looking at that going, oh my God, that's it. By the way you get that number is you divide 0.0857 by 1. That's how you get that fuel-air ratio, just so you know where the math is coming from. So then I'm like, oh, I got it. And so then I'm thinking, okay, well, I still have this 1582 number, and that's got to be the CFM of the thing. And so it's the CFM at that fuel-air ratio, and I guess you could still factor in my conversion and come up with, well, okay, I guess it's about 945 to 985 horsepower, maybe somewhere in there, at 11.67 to 1. You know, you just start to try to play around with the math and you're coming up with that. And so again, probably all absolutely wrong. I've never been right with these things, but in this case, it's kind of funny because so far as they're giving these numbers out, I'm able to find a home for them, but I think that's me basically just sledgehammering a round peg into a square hole. We won't know until they actually tell us. But anyway, that's one way you can decipher the numbers anyway for this latest one. And although, again, I will admit that I probably had forced some meaning into the numbers that may or may not have existed, the results were pretty real. And it was not really a eureka thing, but it was kind of a, wow, that's awfully close, or a little too close not to be maybe somewhat accurate. So at any rate, I'm going to go ahead and wrap it up. Post up what you think those numbers are supposed to mean in the comments below, and I will catch you on the next one. That's a wrap. Adios.